Hello, my name is Soovin Kim. I'm one of the artistic directors of Chamber Music Northwest, and welcome to the first of our four musical conversations during this summer, which will give you a preview each week into some of the music, some of the composers, and some of the performers who will be with us throughout the week. Our guests today will be two composers, Alistair Coleman and Jessie Montgomery, whose works will be featured this week. We'll have a couple of members of the Jupiter String Quartet and a few members of the East Coast Chamber Orchestra, ECHO, who will be really featured throughout the week. This summer's festival is going to obviously be a little bit different from normal, but it's going to also be a truly memorable one with our return to live music with live audience. Each program this summer is going to begin with a prelude, which is going to be a sort of meditation or reflection performed without applause, which will give us a chance to reflect on the events of this past year. But the other half of the title of our summer festival is Rejoice. And these programs are certainly meant to give us a lot to look forward to in the year ahead. Our first guest today is Alistair Coleman. I first met Alistair when he was in high school, and I first commissioned Alistair when he was only 20 years old. Certainly one of the most talented 20-year-old composers that I've ever seen in my life. Alistair was to be a Chamber Music Northwest protege this summer, but because we're simplifying the season, he will return next summer as a protege. However, it's our pleasure to already perform his work this summer, opening the festival at Nordia House for our benefit concert with his string quartet called Moonshot. Just tell us how you started music. What was your introduction to it?
Well, it's great to be here. I started uh, as a singer, actually. I sang like a little treble boy chorister in a church choir. After growing up in kind of a musical family, my parents both met singing, even though they have their normal day jobs. Music has always really been a part of our family, been a part of our friends, and I started singing, and then I got into piano lessons, and I discovered that I just really hated practicing the piano, which uh, maybe is a common phenomenon. But instead of just forcing myself to practice, I started improvising instead of practicing the pieces. And once I discovered how to write these improvisations down, I started composing. So that's kind of how I got into writing music instead of just kind of playing around on the piano.
About how old were you at that time?
I think I started playing when I was 8 or 9. I mean, yeah, I think I was pretty young, but I started when I was about 8 or 9, and then I seriously kind of got into composing when I was in high school, when I was asked to write like pieces for our high school choir or high school orchestra and things like that.
Did you start your undergrad at Juilliard?
I did, yeah. So I applied in my senior year of high school. I got in, and I spent 3 years at Juilliard. And up until like the year that we started the pandemic, during our spring semester, I transferred to Curtis, which is where I am right now. I'm going to go into my last year of undergrad this year.
As you know, for violinists, we don't decide in our senior year that we're going to go to Juilliard, apply to Juilliard. It starts so many years before, and so would you say it's kind of a different process how a young musician evolves into a composer?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to my teacher about this all the time in terms of when you're like, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're like a violinist or a concert, or want to be a concert pianist or something like that, you kind of it's this kind of race to get as good as you can as early as you can, so you can start your career as quickly as possible. But I mean, we know of composers. I have colleagues who started composing when they were in, during their master's degree or something like that, or started to actually pursue composition when they were in graduate school. Or I know there are lots of composers that even started composing way later in their lives as well. So yeah, I think it's kind of what I what to what I understand. I think composing is more of the long game. It's the life, it's that life process of you know, I don't think there's this rush to be the best composer you can be early on, because I think, quite frankly, we don't know much about ourselves when we're so young. So I think that's the really exciting thing about it, is that you can dedicate yourself to something over a lifetime, versus just trying to get as good as possible early on, maybe. So um, yeah, that's kind of how I've been thinking about it a little bit. I'm sure that will change.
For a composer, though, what would be analogous to our practicing those fundamentals and scales and arpeggios? And what are your fundamentals like? It's not. I'm assuming it's not learning, pen technique, pen or pencil technique, right?
No, it's a great question, because I think, um, I think from what I understand from talking to teachers and that I've had at Juilliard and Curtis, I think there was um, this kind of process that young composers subscribe to, maybe, in, I guess, in the olden days, like not in the past, maybe, not in my time right now, where you had to do like counterpoint exercises and you had to work up towards being a composer. It's kind of this idea of you have to learn all the rules before you can break them, or something like that. But now I feel like, for me, like in the past couple of years that I've been at school, there is the freedom within these composition programs where, really exploring what you want to do is encouraged. And I don't think there is as much, um, I guess, guilt maybe into subscribing to a specific style or a technique or a process. But in terms of, like, you know, technique exercises and things like that, I can't really think of anything other than just something you mentioned, which was exploring the repertoire and learning about the composers. I think that's the one thing uh, that composers do to expand their knowledge of, let's say, a specific instrument. Let's say I'm writing for the solo violin, maybe I'm going to explore all the partitas or something like that. Or if I'm writing for cello, maybe I'll look at the cello suites by Bach, or maybe the Britten, suites, or something super virtuosic, and then something more lyrical, just to explore all of the different possibilities within an instrument. Or if I'm working on, a piece for orchestra, maybe I'm going to look at, Rite of Spring or Ravel, and look at all the amazing things that are happening under the hood of a composer's orchestration of an orchestra work.
What composers from the past have been most inspiring to you?
Britten is definitely a big one. I love Britten's music. I love his like, Peter Grimes. The opera is incredible. Um, I also am a huge fan of Barber. I think he's just amazing. And his violin concerto is just something I come back to a lot. It's just gorgeous and beautiful. Also, of course, Ravel, like looking at his orchestrations and things like that. His piano trio is amazing. Um, yeah, I could think of other more, contemporary composers, like Kaya Sariaho is a hero of mine, I would say.
So Moonshot, your quartet that's going to get performed this week, it's actually going to open the entire festival, and it started out as a chamber concerto for violin and chamber orchestra that you wrote for me, and then you transcribed and expanded it into a string quartet. And how does that work? I mean, is it the same piece, just different people are playing it? Does the first violinist have the solo part the whole time?
Yeah, these were all questions I was asking myself um, when I was asked to write an arrangement of the piece for a much smaller ensemble. Because how the whole thing worked is that a few years ago, I visited this museum outside of DC called Glenstone, It's a modern art museum. It's incredibly amazing. Just go, and the architecture paired with the art, paired with the nature. It's a magical place. I'd recommend anyone go there. But I got to go while the new gallery was being constructed, and they had kind of assembled some of the galleries and exhibits. And there was this one room that I walked into that had these black canvases on three walls, and each of them had this white date that was just meticulously kind of painted onto this black canvas. Just a very stark contrast of this white room with these dark, black charcoal canvases. And each one had a date on it. And the first date was like July 16th, 1969. The middle one was July 20th, 1969. And the one to the right was the July 21st, 1969. The piece I wrote for you is a violin concerto for just solo violin and string orchestra. And that was just one movement long, but it had kind of two specific sections to it. So what I decided to do in the end was to kind of arrange the two sections of the violin concerto as two movements of a string quartet. And then finally, the pieces, the string quartet is in three movements. So I actually added a third movement to the piece. So I would say it's like 40% the original concerto and 60% kind of a new piece in a way. Yeah, that's how I would imagine it.
Oh, that's a lot. So it's not at all. It's not like you heard one, then you've heard the other.
No, it was very much kind of it's almost like using the same vocabulary from the original piece and kind of just messing around with the structure or kind of the sentences there. But yeah, it was a really cool opportunity to be able to arrange things, to arrange it for a much smaller ensemble, but you also have to figure out the problem of well, what are you going to do with like a solo violin part versus an ensemble part? Because that's the whole thing about a concerto, is that you have the soloist, which is the focal point, and then you have the orchestra kind of backing the soloist up, or maybe kind of interjecting sometimes. So in the string quartet, definitely the first violin part has more of a prominent role. But I really tried to divvy up a lot of the soloistic kind of writing to different members of the ensemble. So you could really have a lot of fun playing around with things being passed on to different instruments, being able to explore what something could sound like on the cello and the beautiful, high range of the cello, and explore that kind of soloistic sound as well. So it was a lot of fun putting it together. But again, I had to kind of add a lot of new stuff in order to kind of make the form work, make it work as a string quartet versus a soloist versus ensemble kind of work.
Thanks, Alistair. We're looking forward so much to hearing your piece this week and having you at the festival throughout the summer.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited.
Composer Jessie Montgomery was first known to me as a beautiful violinist, as one of the violinists of the Catalyst Quartet that Chamber Music Northwest presented earlier this year. However, Jessie's composition career has truly taken off, and she is one of the most beautiful writers, not surprisingly, for string instruments. She's written some beautiful solo works for violin that I've played, and some of the most brilliant string quartet writing we have today. The work we're performing this week is called Banner, and it is a piece for solo string quartet with string orchestra. And here is Jessie with a few words about her piece, Banner.
Hello, I'm Jessie Montgomery, composer and violinist. And I want to tell you a little bit about my piece, Banner. Banner was composed in 2014. It was commissioned by the Sphinx Organization and the Joyce Foundation of Detroit. It was meant to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Star-Spangled Banner, the United States national anthem. At the time when this opportunity presented itself, I was very personally conflicted. As an African-American person living in the United States, I never felt that that song actually applied to me. I have been one to sit down, remain seated at a ball game or at the opening season concert of the New York Philharmonic. And here I was trying to find my way to celebrate a song that I had a very complicated relationship with. And so in order to do this project, I decided to look at what would a song or a piece that represents where we are now in this very multifaceted, multicultural mixing pot of the United States, if we were to celebrate that, what would that sound like? And so I decided to research and find different songs and anthems of neighboring countries and also work songs and freedom songs from the United States that I could mix together and sort of create this overlaying tapestry and fabric that I think really represents kind of where we are as a people. So within it, there are 12 different songs, pre-existing folk songs or anthems that have been sort of linked together. And a special feature of this sort of mixing pot is the middle section, in which Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Black National Anthem, is performed by the solo bass. And I put it in the solo bass because I really wanted it to come from the back of the orchestra and cause the audience to have to sort of rest and listen. And you really have to listen for that solo bass playing that very expressive line. And so I, in this 8.5 minute brief piece, have tried to sort of convey all of the many layers of what I see when I think about the United States. And so it is, in that way, definitely a political piece, but also very celebratory. In the end, as you hear, it sort of rushes to a big finish to hopefully excite us and inspire us to continue to look at each other in a positive way and to consider and to celebrate all of what makes us who we are. So thank you. I hope you enjoy Banner.
I've known some of the Jupiter String Quartet members since we were all teenagers. Used to play basketball with Nelson when he was quite a bit shorter than I am. I don't have as much of a height advantage anymore. Little did I know that he would become the violinist of one of the great string quartets of the world. I also had no idea at the time that I would make a recording, an album with them. It was of the Chanson Concert for violin, piano, and quartet with pianist Jeremy Denk. We're so happy to have the quartet here this week on double duty as the Jupiter Quartet, but also as members of the East Coast Chamber Orchestra, ECHO, and several of the Jupiter Quartet members were founding members of ECHO. Here is Nelson Lee, their first violinist, and Dan McDonough, their cellist. You are on double duty this week, right? As quartet members and as ECHO members.
Yeah, this is very exciting. It's been a really long time since we've had the opportunity to play with ECHO. Once we started having kids and families, ECHO became more and more difficult for us to schedule. But this is really exciting to connect with old colleagues and friends and to do quartet and to play in this wonderful chamber orchestra.
Were you guys original members of ECHO?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember the days of kind of sleeping on couches and rehearsing in churches in Philly and kind of crazy long days of trying to figure out how to do a conductorless orchestra. It was a lot of fun.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine. Yeah, this will be the first time that we've ever functioned as a quartet sort of within ECHO and outside of ECHO in the same musical environment. So it'll be really exciting to kind of join forces in that way.
There have been several amazing, phenomenal family quartets in the world over the years. Usually siblings.
Yeah.
Maybe occasionally parent-child relationship as well. But you guys are certainly known as, it seems like you are family. You have been always family. Dan, you mentioned Liz. You're married to Liz, and
I'm married to Meg.
Dan, you're married to Meg, and Liz is her sister. They're a second violin and viola. Did the quartet start after you were together, or is that something that also developed as the quartet developed?
Well, we were dumb enough to start a quartet after we were already dating. Yeah. So Nelson, I guess Nelson had the idea, kind of graduating with a master's from CIM, is that right? The Cleveland Institute of Music, to try to start a quartet. And he and Meg were both studying with Don Weilerstein in the same studio. And Meg was like, well, we should ask my boyfriend to play. It's so naive, right? And then she also had a sister, Liz. But 20 years later, we're still playing together. You know, there's a bunch of children in the quartet, and it's been a wonderful thing. You know, we're proud of the fact that we've had the same members for those 20 years.
Yeah, but just a really funny story. We were doing an engagement activity at a school once a long time ago. I think it was for elementary school kids, and they were asking about us. They're always interested, you know, in like the relationships. And whenever Dan and Meg mentioned they're married, everyone's always, oh my gosh, you guys are married. And then one student raised his hand and asked, so who's that guy, pointing at me as the obvious kind of fourth wheel or outsider. But I mean, you know, it's basically at this point, I think they probably spent more time with me than any other members of their own families. So it's pretty much all one unit.
And Nelson has children that are the same age as my youngest two. So you know, during the pandemic, it's been great. We've had a kind of quartet pod with children to play with. And we've been lucky.
Yeah.
There's ways to make anything work, but I think if you are playing with people that you respect, not only as musicians, but also as like humans, I think it helps a lot. I mean, it's such a intimate and sometimes intense dynamic being with the same four people, you know, every day, working hard, that I think you want to really love those people, you know. You want to not just kind of respect them as colleagues, but you want to feel like a deep connection to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm a big sports person, and I follow a lot of these like basketball teams, and when there's dysfunction, you know, in the locker room and stuff like that, it's noticeable on the court, and I think it's kind of the same way. I think in a lot of times in a collaboration, I mean, if you can sense that thing, you know, maybe members aren't getting along, and that's just such an important dynamic. So yeah, like as Dan was saying, like musical connections, but also personal connections are really important.
So Jesse Montgomery's Banner, is this the first time that you're playing it?
Yeah, we're excited. It's a wonderful piece.
It sounds difficult or it's impressive certainly when I heard and saw performances of it. But do you have a sense of how it'll be to put together?
Yeah, we've been rehearsing the quartet part, you know, and looking at the score and listening to recordings that Jesse's made. I think it's not going to be terrible to put together. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, actually. It's a virtuosic piece, but it's well written. You know, she's a violinist, so she understands how to write for strings. And Echo is nimble, so I think it's going to be fun. Yeah.
Have you done any other works of hers?
You know, we're scheduled to play one in the fall.
Breakaway. It's called Breakaway.
Yeah. As part of this American Prism program, which is sort of looking at the history of American music over the last 120 years or so. From Ives forward, basically. But we're excited. I mean, she's kind of taken the world by storm. I mean, she's a hot composer. So it's great to get to play some of her music finally.
It's so wonderful when a really, really good composer is also really, really good at their instrument, right?
Yeah.
And they write for us. So I imagine you're finding it. I haven't played Banner, but I've been working on some of her solo violin pieces, and it's just beautiful, satisfying writing that makes the violin, like allows the violin to thrive somehow.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And and her being a quartet player as well. I mean, it's very unusual, right? That we have a composer who's on the inside. But does it seem like it feels like that as a quartet?
Yeah, I think so. Although to me, this feels more like a kind of, I mean, it's highly integrated piece. I don't feel like it's like really quartet-y, like I feel that's not a real word, but I don't feel like the quartet is separated from the orchestra. There's so much integration, including like a great solo bass part and solo lines for members in the orchestra. So I mean it's really dynamic in the way it's written. It's not just like orchestra quartet. I mean there's a lot of integration, and I think it's going to be really fun to play.
And can you just tell us a little bit about Michi's new piece?
The piece is entitled "To Unpathed Waters, Undreamed Shores." And, actually, I just wanted to read Michi's description of it because I think it's probably the best way. It's a really, really beautifully written, short description of the work. But "To Unpathed Waters, Undreamed Shores" is a multi-movement work for string quartet that celebrates the beauty and vitality of the natural world, suggesting hope and inspiration as humanity addresses fears and worries for our planet. The central themes of regeneration and resilience highlight the need to protect each other and our most vulnerable populations. So the piece addresses kind of serious environmental climate change matters, but tries to do it from a very hopeful and positive perspective. And you'll definitely hear that in the music. It's very atmospheric, but in a very hopeful and uplifting way. This was a piece that was commissioned for us to be written by Michi last summer, kind of in the middle of the pandemic. We made the arrangements sort of before everything got really, really serious. But the commission went forward and we did a virtual premiere of the piece last July 2020 for Bay Chamber Concerts. It was co-commissioned by Bay Chamber Concerts and the Krannert Center here in Urbana.
This is going to be our first in-person performance of this. We've done several virtual performances, but yeah.
Wow, that's a whole nother issue, isn't it? It's weird that we have these like two worlds. Like we've premiered it virtually, but now we're premiering it in person.
Yeah.
And finally, we have three members of the East Coast Chamber Orchestra, violist Melissa Reardon and violinists Nicholas Kendall and Susie Park. To see Echo perform is to experience some of the greatest collection of talent you've ever seen on one stage. Echo's founding members created the orchestra when they were in school and in their early professional years. At the time, probably most of them were jobless and homeless, didn't know what lay ahead in their futures. And now 20 years later, it's actually a chamber orchestra, conductorless chamber orchestra of legendary young professional musicians. Some of the members of Echo are already familiar to Chamber Music Northwest audiences as members of fine string quartets, in the case of Nicholas Kendall as a violinist in the group Time for Three, and as leading members of symphony orchestras. On top of their musical talent, they are an incredibly diverse group of personalities who love making music together and just love being together. How did Echo start?
Well, I was just going to say, Soovin, that the other night, I think it was like 1 a.m, Melissa texted me and says, "Oh my God." And that's usually how we start our text chain. It's usually just like some sort of exclamation of some sort. And then a couple minutes later, the actual follow-up. And I was like, "What? Is everything okay?" She's like, "I just realized this summer, exactly this summer, we will be 20 years old." And then she and I just went back and forth. Susie, I'm sorry you weren't on that text chain because you probably would have been able to contribute. But we were literally reminiscing about staying up till like 3 or 4 in the morning, totally in love with the idea of making music and making music with our friends. And what if we could just, we're in these professional orchestra gigs and there's always a time crunch and everything, but let's just do it rock and roll style and create our own schedule and like let's just get together in somebody's basement or church or whatever. And I mean we were literally the text chain, we were on top of each other on the text chain just going over these early memories of this feeling that we felt, and it still exists today. It's built on friendship, it's built on these really unique connections that we have through music. As all through the history of music, that's how sometimes the best groups are formed, because of just real personal connections. and also this bond of how we view when we come together, which is we put all of our egos at the door, and we are there to serve the music and what special connection to the music through us on stage. And it's a fantastic community of artists, I'd say.
But I think early on, the idea of community was really important to us. We wanted to have a sense of making music together, not just about the music, but we shared, living space together. It was very communal. We cooked dinner together. We all hung out. We had brainstorming sessions. It was very idyllic at that time.
And I think a really great part of being activated, that I think a catalyst for that is actually having rotational seating. We're never in the same spot for each piece, and so you're leading from the back of the seconds, or you're leading from the front of the first, and I think that's really something about that unifies our sound. And you have as much ownership from the back as you do from the front. I like to even say that you should lead more from the back. You should help the people in the front by actually moving and leading more from the back, and also to lead from the basses and the cellos up. That I think it's not incumbent upon the violins to always sound first or play first. We want to sit on that blanket of bass.
Sit on that blanket of bass. That's the tagline.
Can we do a quick round robin, like 30 seconds? Think 30 seconds, each of you, one piece that you're particularly excited for our audience to hear.
Wow, they're all goodies. That's a hard choice. I love Bartók. That's one of my favorite pieces. There's so much raucous energy in there, so that's super fun. Tchaikovsky is a great favorite too. I don't know if I'm allowed to say more than one. But yeah.
I'm excited to play the Carlos Simon elegy, "Cry from the Grave." He's a really great up-and-coming composer, and given the unrest of the world that's happened over the last year, and I think it's a beautiful piece of music, and I haven't actually had the opportunity to play it yet, but I'm excited to play that one.
I'm super excited about Banner, Jesse Montgomery's Banner, because like one of the most inspiring renditions of the Star Spangled, one of the most exciting, my favorite renditions of the Star Spangled Banner was Jimi Hendrix's version at Woodstock, where it was all about talking about how crazy messed up things were at the moment, but how do you celebrate through it all? And there's a lot of documentation of him talking about it, and how absolutely off the charts he was with that solo, but you could always follow the line of the anthem. And what Jesse Montgomery, as I'm learning the piece, actually just started today and looking at the score, I love how she deconstructs this famous, important melody, but then really takes us on some journeys sonically and through extended technique. It's not supposed to be pretty, but also it's going to end celebratory, because at the end it just hauls to the end. But I think it really embodies this time, and I'm looking forward to that as a statement of us, and I'm so glad it's programmed. I did not know the piece before this time, but this is much longer than the 30-second round, so I apologize.
Melissa, you were talking about the Bartók Divertimento.
Yeah.
And Susie inadvertently gave a nice little reveal for our audience who's listening, because the Carlos Simon didn't make it into the program, and it was going to be a bonus for our audience. So, no, it's great, Susie. It's really good.
Oh no, did I just open everyone's Christmas presents for them?
No. It wasn't going to be like that. Thank you for joining us today, and please join us at the beginning of each week to meet more of our performers and composers in musical conversations.